and welcome to Meet the Writers. I'm Georgina Godwin. Tensions between Iran and Israel escalated dramatically with missile strikes exchanged between the two nations. The United States entered the fray by targeting Iranian nuclear facilities, actions that ultimately led to a fragile ceasefire, still in place as we speak. Washington is now positioning itself as broker-in-chief with renewed efforts to restart nuclear negotiations. My guest today brings rare insight into this region and its regime. Raised in Tehran by an Iranian mother and American father, he straddled two worlds, witnessing the upheaval of post-revolutionary Iran before moving to the United States. He later joined US Special Operations, served with distinction, and then reinvented himself in the tech industry after a serious injury. His novel, Shadows of Tehran, draws on this extraordinary life. Whilst not a straight memoir, it is rooted in lived experience, following a boy named Ricardo as he comes of age amid the turbulence of revolutionary Iran, caught between identities, ideologies, and impossible choices. Nick Berg, welcome to Meet the Writers.
Thank you so much.
Growing up in Tehran, this is prior to the revolution. Tell me about that. What were your earliest memories there?
Well, I remember very early growing up in Tehran. It was a very vibrant city, very, very beautiful place. And then technically overnight, it changed after the revolution. The whole city became a different place. I remember going to school, early middle school, and during the revolution, trying to hide my sister's eyes from the bodies that laid around in the streets. All night listening to machine gun fires, all of that. So it became a completely different place, especially for women. It was Iran before the revolution was a very open society for women and everything. And then after the revolution, all of the restrictions came in, completely changed the landscape of the city.
Tell me about your parents, because that's quite an unusual marriage, isn't it?
Yes, it is. So my dad was a naval intelligence officer in the U.S. Navy. His ship actually docked in Iran. He was on his way back from Vietnam War. Docked in Iran, and that's where he met my mom. They got married pretty quickly for that time period. My mom, she was always the rebel in the family. She was the first lady that got a driver's license, first lady that actually smoked cigarettes. And so she was kind of a black sheep and a rebel all her life for our family. And she met my dad, and she said she wanted to marry him, and nobody really objected as much, and they got married.
Mm-hmm. But the marriage ultimately didn't last.
So years later, I found out that my dad was actually an undercover CIA agent, worked for the CIA his whole life, and I met him. He left when I was about 7 years old, and I met him 35 years later in Las Vegas. We caught up and had conversations, and he passed away 2 years ago, so I was with him. I found out that I have like 3 or 4 other brothers and sisters all over the world, half brothers and half sisters all over the world. And I asked him one time, I said, so why did you have so many families and all of that? And he said, well, having a family was the best cover.
Gosh. I mean, this book, you say, is not a memoir, it's a novel. I wonder how closely it is based on your life, because in the book he just completely disappears and makes every effort not to be found at all.
Right. That's very close. That part of it is very close and there's actually a prequel coming to this book, which is his story, because I spent almost a month and a half recording all his stories before he passed away. And it's a very interesting story. He was a very unique person, say a genius. He spoke 7 languages. He was really, really a different type of a person. His job was his life. He was a real American patriot, said that way. I kind of understand him being in special operations and his mind frame and how he thought and how he looked at things, very logical person. So to me, it was, I kind of got it, but my sister, my full sister, that's 2 years younger than me, she never got it. She's always been, oh my God, why did he do this? Why did he do that? And type of a thing.
So just back to your childhood or your teenagehood in Iran, of course, the revolution happens, the mullahs take over. In the book, Ricardo, who's the protagonist, becomes a rebel, becomes a sort of street fighter, a revolutionary. Tell us about that time of your life.
So that time was Iran was really fractured at that point as a society. There were people that wanted the Shah back. There was people that were really religious and following the mullahs. And then there was a whole bunch of what we call the Marxist Islamists, which is MKE, known as the MKE. And then there was a bunch of completely left-wing Marxist organizations in Iran that were all active. Now, most of them were against the Shah before the revolution, working against the Shah. And then once the revolution happened, the mullahs kind of stole the revolution from everybody else. So it was really fractured, and everybody was kind of fighting each other for power at that point. Me growing up in a family that was very open, very logical, not religious at all whatsoever in any shape or form, through the childhood things that I went through, it was a way of fighting against something that I thought was wrong. Really understanding and seeing the impact they had on the people around me and how things changed and how people were kind of going into their own shells and losing the freedoms that they had was really disturbing. So I had to do something. And being a teenager, thinking I can save the world. You know, when you're young, you think these things. You think you can save the world and doing all of that. So that was really the motivation behind it, that I had to do something. Whatever it was, I had to do something.
And what did you do?
So I did a lot of things. I did a lot of things fighting against the Iranian government, anything from dropping cocktail Molotov bombs on IRGC forces, the morality police, to organizing rallies and parties and those types of things, passing out flyers. At one point, I realized passing out flyers doesn't do any good and had to do something more. And as deeper and deeper I got into it, the more and more violence became the answer, until the point that I had to get out of Iran, because at that point they knew that who I was, and they were executing people left and right. People would come to your door in the middle of the night, take people out, and you never hear from them again. There's this famous cemetery in Iran that is miles long, and there's no headstones on it. These are all the people that they executed and buried in those cemeteries.
Were you ever arrested?
Many times. They never really kind of put two and two together of all of the things that I did. But I was arrested 2 or 3 times.
In the book, Ricardo is forcefully conscripted. Did that happen to you too?
Yes.
So you were forced to serve in the Iranian army?
I basically picked up in the middle of the street, and it took me about 8 months for them to figure out I wasn't supposed to be there.
Because you were too young?
No, it was because, the age didn't matter at that point. There were soldiers at 13, 14 years old during that war, putting hand grenades around themselves and rolling underneath the tanks and running through minefields. And it's all because of the brainwashing that they got, that if they die, they go straight to heaven. So the age was never the problem. It was that technically I was a U.S. citizen, and I shouldn't have been conscripted into the Iranian army.
You're talking about the brainwashing, and it's very interesting because you talk in the book about how that Islam was not originally the religion in Persia as it was,
right.
that the mullahs are basically taking things back to the 6th century. And I wondered if you just unpick that a little bit.
Sure, absolutely. So Iran is outside of Israel, is the only non-Arab country in the Middle East. And Iran's original religion is Zoroastrianism, which is the first monolithic religion in the world, and it's older than Judaism, actually. And it's still practiced in Iran, and a lot of them moved to India after the Arab invasion. The Arabs invaded Persia and forced Islam, basically, on the Persian people. And when the mullahs took over, they basically tried to strip the Persian identity from Iran and the people, that the nationality doesn't mean anything and all of that. But at the same time, Iranians are very proud, very, very proud of their heritage, the Persian Empire. They still talk about it and all of that. So it became a kind of clash between the two ideologies, having the Persian identity and having the Iranian identity versus being a true Muslim process. So there's a lot of clashes, even internally when you talk to people. A lot of people don't want to identify themselves as Iranians because they think that Iran as a name has a Islamic identity to it. That's why they identify themselves as Persian, to kind of differentiate it from that identity.
And there was a huge Jewish population at one point too.
It was a huge Jewish population. During World War II, there was a lot of Jewish people that actually from Poland and those places that they were brought into Iran on their way to Israel. And we called them Children of Tehran. And my uncle was really active with that whole process of making sure that they got placed. These were mostly kids at the time during World War II. And my uncle was very active with helping them to make sure they get placed with Jewish families. And he actually had a bookstore. It's in the book. He had a bookstore, and I would hang out at that bookstore all the time. And he had a few Jewish friends that would stop by and have conversations and have tea with him, and we would have long conversations. And these were actually survivors of World War II that came from concentration camps.
How much of that beautiful culture and cuisine and just richness that you describe still exists in modern day Iran?
It's still there. It's still there. I haven't been there, so I don't know.
Because you'd be executed.
Exactly.
Stay away, I would.
Exactly. Yeah. But I have a lot of friends that go back and forth until the latest conflict that happened. But a lot of friends that go back and forth. And the beauty and the culture never goes away. It's kind of ingrained in the people. And one thing people don't understand is the Persian culture is very maternal versus paternal. Being a maternal, women have a very high place in the Persian culture. And the Islamic culture kind of clashes with that because they're very oppressive towards women. So in the old days when the Persian Empire was, when the soldiers would go to battle, they yell out their mother's name, and that would signify how brave they are. Persian language is one of the languages that doesn't have gender. So you will never know if it's a he or a she unless you say the name of the person itself. When you say, in English, you say husband and wife. In Persian, you say wife and husband. So it's a very different, and women don't take their husband's name either, last name either, after marriage. They keep their own identity. So it's a very different culture.
How much has that changed?
Nothing. It's still the same way. It's still the same way.
Now, when you were fighting, this was in the Iranian army, this was against Iraq.
Iraq, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And just tell me a little bit about that experience.
It was basically 3 weeks of, here's a gun, here's how to shoot it. Okay, you're done. Go. Pretty much. That was about it. There was really not much of a training in that process. It was go to the front lines and kind of figure it out.
How did you get out of Iran?
Through the Turkish border with a sheepskin. And
so exactly as it
exactly
says in the book.
I was in the
So
book.
I wonder, just describe that for our listeners who haven't yet read it.
Yeah, so basically through the mountains between Turkey and Iran, that's where the Kurdish area is. So the Kurds live in that area of Turkey, Iran, and northern Iraq. They kind of don't recognize any borders, have herds of sheep, then they kind of live this lifestyle of herding their sheep across all of these mountains and things like that. So basically pay them, and they put you in the middle of 2,000 sheep with the sheepskin, and you cross the border across, and they know all
on your hands and knees.
On your hands and knees, yeah, for about 3 miles, and to get to the other side, and it's freezing cold. It's up high in the mountains, and you get to the other side, and they just kind of tell you, okay, you're good. You're on your own.
And you're on your own in Turkey, young, hardly any money. What happens next?
I figured I found a friend, kind of took me under his wing. He was actually with the opposition to the Iranian government. He was smuggling weapons into Iran, and he had a truck, and we kind of hang out with him until I was able to find my way to America.
And you got to America, you did some low-level jobs, and then decided to join the army. Yeah, because I didn't know English. That was the other part. I had to learn English. I knew a little bit that I could get around, just enough to be able to get around. But it was, so I really didn't have any idea what I was going to do when I come to the U.S. What I knew about the U.S. was all of the things I seen in movies and TVs and things like that. At the time, it was the late 80s. Michael Jackson and breakdancing and all of that stuff was kind of the theme.
of the thing, and all of the smuggled movies that we watched secretly in Iran were all about those things. My idea of America was, I'm going to go, not 19 years old, I'm going to go to America and I'm going to learn how to break dance and I'm going to join a gang. So that was the idea of it. But until I got there, and it was a different story, I had to figure out a way to make some money, and I figured out that, oh, this is not easy. This is not going to be easy. So I worked at a restaurant, at a fast food restaurant, and there was this gentleman across the street that would come and have lunch at that restaurant every day, and he was Army recruiter. He said, hey, you want to join the Army? We got 3 meals a day, a place to sleep, good money. So that was it. That's how I joined the Army.
I mean, it must have been a very odd experience having fought in the Iranian army and then fighting for the US.
At that point, I wasn't really thinking about that. It was really about survival.
Yeah.
So this book is the reason I decided to write it is because the book is all about survival and really understanding how to survive and deciding not to be a victim and not to let the circumstances define you.
You hammer this down very, very firmly in the book. I love all the little quotes at the beginning of every chapter. Winston Churchill, you quote
yes,
a lot.
He's my hero.
Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It's the courage to continue that counts.
Exactly.
And so that other one is something like, when you're in hell, keep going.
Keep going, yes. Exactly, yeah. The thing is that the reason I wrote this book, it wasn't to be a memoir. The reason I wrote this book is that for other people to read it, and you see in the preference of it, I talk about it could be a mirror or it could be a window into what everybody is going to. If somebody can relate to it in some way, that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, that doesn't matter what happens today, there's always hope for tomorrow.
Tell me about your time within the US Army and particularly the Special Forces, because in the book that all sorts of locations come up, Rwanda, for instance. And
yes, I started, my first deployment was during the first Gulf War with Iraq. And going back to Iraq, fighting with the same enemy, just from a different angle, with a different uniform and from a different army, and this time with a lot more training and all of that. So that was the first deployment that I did. And then I ended up in all different kinds of parts of the world, from Rwanda to Sierra Leone to Bosnia to a number of different places. And those are some of the areas that I can't put a lot of details to because of the military. So I fictionalized a little bit of that portions of it.
What's life like within that institution?
I loved it. It was great. I would call myself an adrenaline junkie, and you have to be a little bit crazy to live that kind of a lifestyle. After years of self-reflection and working with my therapist more than anything else, I realized is that living in Iran and escaping and all of these things, I basically wasn't comfortable with peace. I had to keep going. I have to keep moving. And if I didn't move and I weren't in those situations, I kind of felt like I'm going to lose. And it's one of those things that kind of brings it out in you to start thinking that if everything is quiet, there's something wrong. If there is peace, there's something wrong. You're waiting for the other shoe to drop at that point. So being in the Army gave me that continuous process of going from mission to mission, from places to places, to be able to do that. And I made some promises to some people that in the book, you read in the book in Iran, and I wanted to live true to those promises. And I still want to live true to those promises. Now I'm old, I can't be in the Army anymore, but I can't make a difference in other ways.
I mean, you talk about the Army as a sort of band of brothers or family.
It is. It is actually a family. It's really a family. From somebody that came from Iran, from a completely different culture, walked in there and really, they took me in. They took me in and they made a soldier out of me, but at the same time, they gave me a home. And they gave me a family that I never thought I could have.
I wonder if we could turn our gaze now to what's going on at the moment, both in Iran but also in America, because it seems to me from the outside that the Army now has been very politicized. Would you agree?
It was always politicized. It was always that way. You always have different politics in America. But one thing I would say in America is that if there is a crisis, everybody kind of comes together. Another one of my favorite quotes from Winston Churchill is that America will always do the right thing after they tried everything else.
Yeah. There's been a lot of concern about Donald Trump's direct control, the commander-in-chief's control of the U.S. Army right now. What would you say to that?
Well, the president always had that power. It's nothing new. The president has always been the commander-in-chief. And there's people that like Donald Trump. There's people that don't like Donald Trump. But we all have to really think it's only 4 years.
Yeah.
And it's somebody else will come into power in 4 years. I mean, if we look at other presidents and what they done, George Bush, Bill Clinton, Obama, all of these presidents had their own faults and positives in everything else. Donald Trump, I think he's a very dominating figure, and a lot of people are really concerned about those things of what he does. But when it comes to foreign policy, I think he's a very protectionist type of a person with his views on NATO and different types of things. But again, it's only 4 years.
Yeah. So Iran and uranium enrichment and the whole nuclear question there. How can you enlighten us from your knowledge?
Iran's government would do anything. The Islamic government would do anything for its own survival. That's really the basics of it. And they took a note out of North Korea's page that the only reason that North Korea government is lasted as long as it did is because it was able to create nuclear weapons and survive that process. So they basically were after the same thing. The thing about it is that they always give the wrong signals to the whole world of why do you need 60% enrichment? That's unusual for a nuclear power plant if you're trying to use it for civilian purposes. They completely ignored a lot of the warnings from the United Nations nuclear treaty, and they were part of the non-proliferation treaty. So they ignored a lot of those things, and they're really good at procrastination. They're really good at dragging things out, and that's what they did with the first nuclear agreement that they made during the Obama administration. They're very good at dragging things out until they can get it right. And then all of a sudden bring it out and say, oops, we did it, type of a thing. And from the Israeli perspective, I think Israel, when they say never again, that's what it was. I mean, the reason is if you look at the ballistic missiles that they sent over to Israel, they proved that they had the capability of delivering missiles that far. Why would Iran need that kind of a capability? That's the question that nobody really ever asked. Why do you need that long range of a missile? Because if you look at Iranian's neighbors, Turkey, well, there's never going to anything happen with Turkey. Iraq is pretty much out of the picture now after all of the things that happened there. You got Afghanistan, and Pakistan is already a nuclear power, and they're both Islamic countries, so they're never going to bother, and Iran knows they don't stand a chance with Russia. Gulf states are not really a threat to Iran either, so why do you need that long-range ballistic missiles unless you're trying to be next North Korea?
Do you think that there is a possibility of regime change again?
It's very close, actually. I think the regime has been really weakened right now. And with Khamenei being so old, being in hiding most of this time after all of these things, there's a really good chance, and there's whispers of it right now in Iran. There has been some demonstrations, but currently, as I understand it, in Tehran right now is under technical martial law because they have everybody in the streets checking everybody's phones as they walk by. They have, since the ceasefire started, they have had so many crackdowns, and they're basically hunting for, as they call it, Israeli spies all over the place. Because one thing they understood is that Israel is farther deeper into Iran than they ever thought. That the Mossad has pretty much control of the whole country, and they know where everybody is and what they're doing. So that was a big shock, I think, to the Islamic government.
So if there were regime change, who would take over?
I think at this point, the only person that can lead the country is the crown prince. And that's because he doesn't want the monarchy. He doesn't want to replace the monarchy as it was before. He wants to basically drive a democratic process for the Iranian people, for them to basically decide what form of a government that they want.
And he's the son of the Shah.
He's the son of the Shah, yes.
And where is he based at the moment?
He lives in Virginia. The only thing I say, a lot of people, a lot of critics of him say he's been out of the country and have lost touch with the Iranian people for a very long time. But the counter-argument is that he's the only one that is a viable option at this point. There's really no viable opposition. And he has been in touch. He has been working relentlessly with all of the opposition forces in Iran and outside of Iran. He was here in UK actually last week meeting with some of the members of the UK Parliament and stuff. So he has a plan. It's just that he needs support.
And if that happened, would you go home?
Absolutely. I would absolutely go home. I don't like living in exile, so absolutely I would go home.
And just before we go, Nick, tell me about this experience of writing fiction based on your own life story and how close this book is to what actually happened, because it's fantastically exciting. It's an adventure story, really. Something happens on every page. It's very compelling.
Yeah, so I didn't want to write it as a memoir, because writing as a memoir, then I had to explain a lot of things. What I mean by explaining is that as a human nature, you justify yourself when you write something and why you did this, why you did that, and you try to justify it, good or bad or indifferent. I wrote it, and then the other thing is life is messy. Life doesn't have a structure. When you write as a fiction, you have to have a structure. You have to have arcs in the process, and you have to put these things into perspective. I didn't want this book to be a journal of events. I wanted it to be explore the emotional side of things. It was about the human journey out of it, and all of the characters in the book of how they felt and how they thought about things. And Ricardo's journey is about his emotional journey more than it is about the adventures that he was in.
Did you enjoy writing it?
I loved writing it. I had to step away a lot of times. It took me 2 years to write it. And I had to step away a lot of times because it got really, really close and I had to really take a deep breath. And I actually had a writing coach that helped me write this. Ken Scott, he's actually a London Times bestseller that helped me write this book. I would write a chapter, send it to him. He would kind of critique it and send it back to me. And we would go back and forth on these conversations. And he would talk to me and he would say, Nick, you really, really want to shorten this part down because you're going into way too much details. Because I figured out if it was my version of it, this book probably be like a War and Peace. But
with very little peace.
Yeah, with very little peace in it.
Yeah. And finally, the end says, to be continued.
Yes, there's a next book coming. I want to close Ricardo's story and be able to kind of dive into. This book was really, there was a lot of military adventure in it. The life after the military is a little bit different. And I wanted to change that.
Well, I'm sure that people will be very, very interested to read Ricardo's story. The book is called Shadows of Tehran, Forged in Conflict from Iranian Rebel to American Soldier. Ricardo's story, not the only one that's interesting. Nick Berg, you are absolutely fascinating.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming on to talk to me. Shadows of Tehran is published by Fortis Publishing and it's out now. You've been listening to Meet the Writers, thanks to the production team of Steph Chungu and Elliot Greenfield. And you can download this show and previous episodes from our website or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.